Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
When I first started studying over at AZC, Peg was teaching a class, and it was a two-part class, and it was probably took, I don't know how long it took, forever, to read in the Buddha's words, which is quite a tome. It's like all the major teachings in the Pali Canon, not all of them, of course, but a good number of them. And it does show up in there, but I didn't remember that from then. And now I was just looking through a retreat that I did last year, and it actually mentions them, but I had no recollection of that whatsoever. So that's how my memory is. But we don't normally talk a whole lot about the seven factors of enlightenment. It's not a daily thing, as far as I know. So when I started looking at this to kind of research a little bit about it, I thought, well, so what are they exactly, and why might it be important to study them? How is it going to help us in our practice, and how might it help us in our life? So I trust that we'll figure some of this out through the course of this intensive, but so I'm holding those questions. Now, a lot of those words of the actual factors, which I'll mention in a few minutes, they're words that we hear a lot, but not, we don't hear them so much about the factors of enlightenment. We hear about mindfulness, we hear about joy, we hear about energy, these kinds of things, but not with the seven factors, unless you've actually looked at the seven factors before. So it's a slightly different usage. So anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. I wanted to give some context for the seven factors of enlightenment. And some of you will already know this, certainly Joel and Ellen probably, because Joel gave a talk on, or a retreat on the Satipatthana Sutta, in which this is contained. But what I wanted to do is to give some context. There's what really got me excited about this whole studying of this was, where does it fit in with all the other teachings? How does it fit in, and where does it fit in exactly? So I kind of like to show you that flow, if you will, so that we can kind of locate that, and then from there we'll talk a little bit about what the factors are, and then we'll go more specifically in them in the days to come. So that's okay, I will move on. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, there's a certain, well, actually it comes up a couple of times, but it's in the discussion of the Buddha's enlightenment, actually, not surprisingly, that the seven factors arise specifically. So the Pali Canon the Satipatthana is in the Pali Canon, and the Pali Canon is a compendium of teachings passed down through centuries, right? Through oral tradition, and eventually written up in a specifically created language for the teachings in Pali, right? So, as I say, Joel talked about the Satipatthana Sutra, and he also talked about the 5 hindrances later on in another retreat. And so this goes right in hand, right in there, in the Satipatthana Sutta, and the hindrances we're going to be talking about a little bit in my talk as well, or our talks. But even if you work with Joel in those earlier retreats, it's not a problem. This is a standalone, so no worries. Okay, so in a particular section of the Satipatthana Sutta, there are many of the Buddhist teachings put together, like I say, kind of a flow, and specifically talks about the way to enlightenment. So there's one section in particular that caught my attention, and it's a conversation that the Buddha has with Ananda. So I'm going to read that because it's all in that language. Ananda approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said, "Venerable Sir, is there one thing which, when developed and cultivated, fulfills 4 things? And 4 things, when developed and cultivated, fulfills 7 things. And 7 things, when developed and cultivated, fulfills 2 things." Now this is an obvious setup for a teaching, right? So the Buddha replied, "There is Ananda." And then he repeats the whole thing back. "There is one thing, which when developed and cultivated fulfills 4 things. There are 4 things, when developed and cultivated, fulfills 7 things. And 7 things, when developed and cultivated, develops 2 things." So let's talk about what the 1, the 4, the 7, and the 2 are. So this is a description of the Buddha's enlightenment. So the first thing is mindfulness. And mindfulness, it's interesting, there's mindfulness and there's mindfulness. So there's mindfulness like of the body, which is not so much what we're talking about. We're talking about mindfulness in terms of concentration, right? And the next one, once you have the mindfulness, you know what mindfulness is, and you can find yourself in the state of mind, it's mindful. Then the Buddha would turn toward the 4 establishments of mindfulness through the breath. And that's where the meditation comes from. And specifically, the Anapanasati is a meditation that he used frequently, and he called it the Tathagata's dwelling. And that is where, in the meditation, you go through and study the body by mindfulness of breath. Then you study the feeling, also through the breath, through the use of mindfulness of breath. And then you also study the mind with mindfulness of the breath. So mindfulness of the breath is the key thing here. And the last one is looking at either what they call mental objects or phenomena. So those are the 4 things that are studied in the establishment of mindfulness. And so you go through those, and that's the Anapanasati, and over time, that has an effect on a person doing those this particular meditation. And what happens during these meditations is that the 7 factors of enlightenment arise, naturally arise, is how it's talked about. So, and then after the 7 factors, the first one being mindfulness, and we'll go through all the others, and then the last one is equanimity or equipoise, or
equanimity.
Thank you, equanimity. I had trouble with this word earlier today. Equanimity. And then and the last one being equanimity, and as that arises, then becomes the cultivate and develop the 2 things, which are true knowledge and liberation. Of course, liberation is talking about enlightenment here. So it's quite the little formula. And so it's exciting to think that you could follow all these steps, and I'm going to be enlightened probably in 2 months or maybe 2 years, right? But it's kind of silly to look at it that way. It's just a practice. It's a guide on how to meditate. And it explains what's happening as you do this in a consistent manner. As far as enlightenment goes, in my mind, it's not so much about being enlightened forever, but rather it primes you for enlightening activity that may occur here and there and whatever. So, or not, there's no guarantees on that. But still, I think it's important at any rate to study this and to meditate with it, as it is the instructions from the Buddha. And what impact is that going to have on your life? What you're basically setting up is a mindful life, a joyful life, there's investigation. I'll go through the 7 factors. The first factor is mindfulness, as I said before, through concentration and through the establishment of the foundation, establishment of a mindfulness, the first thing that's going to come up is mindfulness. And then with that, so you spend time with mindfulness, see what it's like. You're being mindful of your thoughts, you're being mindful of sensations, you're being mindful, just as we do in meditation. It's a description of what we do, right? We pay attention to what they are. And then after that is fulfilled. Well, what does that mean exactly, fulfilled? And that's a good question. And that, I can't exactly answer the question of what exactly is it when it's fulfilled, but there's a point in which you've well established that, and that works. And when that point comes, then the next one automatically starts to arise. So the next one is investigation. So if you come to the point where you've worked with and meditated with mindfulness as the result, after a while you'll start to investigate. And there are two ways of investigation. There's investigation of kind of what's arising and examining what it is, and just examining what's going on. And then there's another kind of investigation and examination is, as you continue to study and meditate, and you hear things from teachers or readings or what have you, or even the Buddha's teachings themselves, there's a point when you may say, should I just swallow this? I mean, he got to enlightenment, and does that mean that's the way I should go? And actually, that's the point in which we can investigate, is this true for me? And this is what the Buddha encouraged, is not to be a blind faith believer, but rather to be aware of what's going on, and does this seem true to you? So I think that's a really important part of that investigation aspect. And then as you've examined that and worked with that, again, you will fulfill it, what exactly that means when you've fulfilled it, when you get to the point, and that all of a sudden what will arise is energy. Energy arises. So it's like energy, like being jazzed up, after investigating. There's a certain amount of energy. And the energy is really important in the cultivation of all of this, because energy is what's going to take you through forever. If you keep your energy, you can't afford to, when you get bored, to say, okay, I'm done. Well, you can do that, but it doesn't serve you. It takes you the energy that keeps you going, no matter what obstacles you may have while you're practicing. It's a continuation, this energy that arises. There was something that I read, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but about the energy, about this practice is not for lazy people, because it's not an easy practice. It requires some effort. And the Buddha, although he kind of messed up his body a bit from, 7 years of ascetic practices, but spiritually, he was still very energetic in his teaching. He's never going to stop. He continued to the very end. So that's a part of the energy too. And as the energy arises and eventually reaches a certain point, then what arises is joy. We were talking about joy this morning. And how lovely is that? Joy arising. And as the joy arises, it's funny, the energy comes first. Well, who was I talking to about energy and joy yesterday? Oh, I know, Susan this morning. Anyway, how those two go together. You kind of need energy to get to joy, right? Anyway, so, and then after joy, so joy is kind of this high thing, right? There's a lot of excitement. And then after you've cultivated that well, what arises is tranquility. Tranquility. So there's a certain, maybe, resting there. And then the next one is concentration. Now, samadhi. So there's a lot of different kinds of concentration, and there's a lot of different qualities of concentration. It can be very strong. And this kind of, the samadhi, as Dogen says, it's when you drop away body and mind. That's a pretty concentrated state to be doing that. So that's the seventh one, no, sixth one. And then we move into the seventh one, which is that word again, equanimity. There it is, it finally came out, equanimity. And it's the equanimous mind in which other things can arise. More can arise. We can be aware of a lot more with quiet mind. And through this whole movement or flow, there's a gradual, it starts out with a lot of energy, and then we're slowing down, and it's getting quieter and quieter so that you can become more aware. So that's what this is, what we're looking at. And we will, as I said before, be looking at all of those individually and doing some exercises with them, and then trying to put it together and see what we've learned and how we can use this. So that's the intention, and that's about the time I'm supposed to finish. I can't believe it. Let's see if there's anything else here. I think that pretty well takes care of it. So, thank you very much. If you have any questions, you've got a minute to do it. Ask questions.